We're on Hey Amud Beis, the bottom of 5b, and we're discussing the Sotah after she has been warned by her husband and after she has secluded herself with the person about which she was warned, and she hadn't had a chance yet to go to the temple and drink the waters of the Sotah, and her husband passes away. Her husband is now deceased, and they have no children. So she is now somewhat linked to the brother-in-law, because ordinarily the law is that Torah encourages a widowed who has no children to marry the brother-in-law, to bear children to the family through the brother. That's called, that process of them becoming one is called yibum or yivama. The separation process, if the widow and the brother of the deceased husband don't want to marry, then instead of the ordinary divorce, they do something called chalitza. And here we're being told that because at the moment of the husband's death, husband and wife were forbidden to be with each other because she's a bona fide Sotah, and the Sotah, until the waters clarify what happened behind closed doors, is forbidden to be intimate with her husband. Therefore, she is also forbidden from being intimate with her brother-in-law, because the marriage that she had with her first husband rolls over to the brother. And thus, she must go through chalitza rather than yibum, rather than getting married. Now, somebody asked me a very good question, which is, if the marriage rolls over, why can't she just be married to the brother-in-law and then drink the waters of the Sotah then? Just like she would have drank the waters of the Sotah under the first husband, why can't she drink the waters of the Sotah under the second husband? Now, I was mentioning to Robert before that in my mind, I tried to find where I read this, but I thought it might have been earlier in the Gemara. I thought maybe it was in the Rambam. Anyway, I scanned through the Rambam. I didn't look at every single law in detail, so maybe I'm missing something. But it's quite clear that the law of the Sotah has to be, because of the way the Torah phrases it, has to be the same husband who warns her and the same husband who brings her to the temple to give her the drink. So it couldn't be one husband warns her and then the next husband brings her to the temple to drink. That's the way the Torah phrases it, that he brings her to the temple to give her the water, which means in theory, for example, the law is, this I did see clearly in Rambam as I was scanning through it, the law is that if the husband warns her and then she secludes herself, and then he decides he wants to take back his warning and wants to forego the whole procedure, then he could do that. And she won't have to drink. So it all comes down to basically the husband bringing her to the temple to drink the water, and therefore I don't think the next husband could do that. Although I haven't seen it explicitly, but somewhere in my mind it's there. Anyway, that's the answer to the question.
That's
okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because now, after she secludes herself, and obviously the warning and secludes herself, she's forbidden until she drinks the waters. But you're saying that he can
yeah. So he
stop
would
the
have to
Sotah proceeding, but there's already been sort of a.
So he has to divorce her and what's the law with the ketubah? I don't remember if I think she loses her ketubah because she violated the warning. So I'm pretty sure she loses her ketubah, but I'm quite sure that they can't, now that they can't be together, they can't be together, and therefore they have to divorce. That becomes his choice, either separation or drink the water. I'm not mistaken. Again, this is all from memory, so I don't quote me for sure, and I'm sure these laws are going to come up as we go through the Gemara. But I'm quite sure once they become forbidden to each other, unless she goes through with the Sotah and then comes out clean, they can't go back to living together properly. I'm quite sure that's the law. Okay, anyway, God willing, these laws will become more clear as we go through the Gemara. So now the Gemara introduces another way of the conversation that we read yesterday happening. And essentially, we're coming down to why she doesn't do yibum. Why can't she marry the next husband? So yesterday, we quoted from the verse. The verse said, and you can see it here, Yatzis, if you see my pointer, Yatzis mi Beisai, she goes out of her home. She goes and becomes the wife of another man. And we pointed out that the Torah refers to it as another man, as in a foreign man, as opposed to a man that's already linked to her, namely her brother-in-law. So that was the logic we deduced from the verse as to why she should not go through with the Yubum, why she can't go through with marrying the next brother-in-law. Now the Gemara gives another way of coming to the same conclusion. The Ista Amri, it's over here, it's my pointer. The Ista Amri, there are those that say, Amar Rav Yosef said, it's the same Rav Yosef speaking, but different versions of Rav Yosef. Up here, Rav Yosef, and down here, Rav Yosef. So Amar Rav Yosef says, Rahmana Amra, the Torah says, Rahmana literally means the merciful one, meaning God. God says in his Torah, she should leave her house, and she should go and become married to another man. Why is she being told to leave her house? Why is she being told that she has to leave? Why does he have to divorce her? So she shouldn't go ahead and destroy the home. In other words, we talked about this earlier in the Gemara. The Gemara talked about how we compared promiscuity to the rotting sesame, and that promiscuity in a home destroys the home. So obviously, the relationship between this husband and wife isn't a healthy one, because he's warning her to not go with somebody, and then she's going off to somebody else. So obviously, this relationship is toxic, and it's going to cause the home to be destroyed. And now you want to keep this toxicity in the family and roll it over to the brother-in-law. So if she didn't bring promiscuity with her, and that's why she's being told that she has to separate from her husband, now you want her to go to the husband, to the brother-in-law, and bring the same promiscuity and all those issues to the brother-in-law? Why would you do that? So this is another version of coming to the same conclusion, but this time not deducing it from the verse, but rather reasoning our way to it. If she's a destructive force in the first marriage, why are we allowing her to go to the brother-in-law and bring that destructive force there?
Why should she go to the brother-in-law?
Right, the brother-in-law, ordinarily she's supposed to go to the brother-in-law, right? Because
yeah, but if she's having an affair with somebody else,
we don't know. Suspect.
Well, it's come quite close.
It's quite close, and it's suspect, right? So you're asking why should she go to the brother-in-law, right?
If she's secluding herself with him,
not with him,
she probably loves him.
With somebody else.
Somebody else.
Secluding herself with a third party. She's secluding herself with a third party, nothing to do with the brother-in-law.
Okay.
In other words, he warned her about going to some other guy, and she went ahead and secluded herself with that other guy. And now the husband died, and ordinarily she would marry the brother-in-law. But now she can't marry the brother-in-law. So yesterday we deduced from the verse why she can't. And now we're saying the reason why she shouldn't marry the brother-in-law is because she had this bad vibe in the first marriage. Why we were making her marry a second person? I guess it's kind of your point. Right?
Well, my point is that the stranger is the one she loves. If she was secluded with him all the time.
She can't marry him.
She can't marry him?
No. If she's being penalized for beginning a relationship under wrongful circumstances. I think we even
were they able to live together?
No.
Were they able to live together in those days?
No. She'd have to either be single or marry somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah, but here specifically we're talking about why she doesn't marry the brother-in-law. Why she doesn't marry the brother-in-law, which ordinarily she would. So yesterday we deduced it from the verse, which says that she should marry another man, as in a foreigner. And now we're deducing it from logic. She brought promiscuity and destruction to her first home. Why are we making her now marry the brother-in-law to bring destruction there? Right. So Abaye then asks, simple question. If we're blaming it all on her, and we're saying that she's going to bring destruction to the next home she goes, then now, she also shouldn't marry anybody. Not to destroy that person, not that person's home. In other words, if we're saying that she caused destruction with her first husband, and therefore we don't want her to marry the brother-in-law because she's going to bring destruction there. Well, why let her marry anybody? She's going to bring destruction wherever she goes. So Amar Lei, so Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, and now we're going to the top of Vav Mebei Aleph 6, A. Are we forcing her to marry the other person? In other words, like this. She clearly, was a destructive force in her first marriage. She's hanging out with some other guy to the point that even after her husband warns her, she's still hanging out with this other guy in seclusion. Okay, so there's a problem. So when she now has to separate from her husband, if somebody wants to come along and marry her and he says, well, I think between the two of us will be okay, then that's their free choice. But we can't then go ahead and impose upon her that she should marry somebody. That's not fair to the guy. The guy will look and say, I don't want to marry a girl who in the last marriage was secluding herself with a third party. And that's what's happening with the Yavam. The brother-in-law is being not compelled, but he's certainly being encouraged by Torah to marry his deceased brother's wife. So if she was a nice girl, okay, so Torah is encouraging him to marry his deceased brother's wife because the Torah wants him and her to establish a lineage in their brother's memory. Okay, if she was a good girl, why not? Encourage him, not force, because he can do chalitza, but encourage. But here, where she was behaved promiscuously under the brother, now we're going to encourage the brother to marry a promiscuous girl? That's not fair. And therefore, they're told chalitza. But a third party who is freely choosing to marry her, we're not going to stop them. And there's the reason why we're allowing her to marry somebody else, even if she may have been a destructive force, but we're not going to compel her or even encourage her to marry the brother-in-law, because we can't encourage a marriage. We can't encourage some guy or even compel some guy to marry a girl that has a history. But if someone off the street wants to choose, then that's their choice. Okay, so that's a second version to this conversation between Rabbi Yosef and Avaye with respect to the Sotah, who then becomes a widow, and her relationship to the brother-in-law. Ikeda Amri, a third version to the same conversation. Amr Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says, Hakasov karahu acher. The Torah refers to the man she marries after a divorce with a problem, right? There's a problem because she's behaving promiscuously, and now they're divorcing, and then she goes, and the Torah says she should marry acher, she should marry another person. So why does the Torah refer to as another person? Yesterday, we learned that to mean the word acher, another. We learned that to mean that the Torah is instructing, find an other, find someone who is disconnected. But here, the Gemara's understanding is to mean a description of the kind of person this person is. He is an other. Why is he an other? She'ein ben zugay sharishain. He doesn't share commonality with the first husband. The first husband, Shezeh, the first husband, he saw promiscuous behavior and he decided to put an end to it. And unfortunately, the end of this scenario was divorce. But at least, from his perspective, he saw promiscuous behavior and he decided that it's not appropriate for him to be living around with someone who's promiscuous. Vizeh, and now the other guy who decides to marry this woman who's now divorced, this divorcee, he invited this promiscuousness into his home. So the two of them share no commonality. Right? The first guy is trying to rid his home of promiscuousness, and the other guy is introducing him to his home. So if the Torah refers to the man she's going to marry as an acher, an other, because he is willfully inviting promiscuousness, and you now want to compel her, some guy, to become that other who's going to invite promiscuousness into his home, we can't do that. And therefore we go along with chalitza, and we say that she should not marry the brother-in-law, because the Torah refers to the person who will marry this girl as an other, as someone who is willfully inviting promiscuity, and we're not going to impose that on the brother-in-law. Okay, so if that's the way Rabbi Yosef approached it, in this version of the conversation, Abaye says to Rabbi Yosef, Elamayata, if that's the case, Nisis la'acher, let's go through the logic here. She was married to one guy. This guy warned her and then she secluded herself, and then this guy died. Okay? She's not marrying the brother-in-law because we don't want to compel the brother-in-law to invite promiscuousness into his home. Now, what happens if she goes along and marries another person? She married somebody else. And now husband number 2 dies without children. And he has a brother. So seemingly, like you said, she also shouldn't marry the brother-in-law.
Yeah, but that's not related to the chain of Sotah any longer, right?
That's the Gemara's response. But at this moment, the Gemara is assuming that Rabbi Yosef is labeling anyone who marries this girl as someone who is willfully inviting promiscuity. That's the way the Gemara is thinking about it. We label this girl that whoever marries her is inviting promiscuousness, which is why we're not compelling the brother-in-law to. Now, what if she remarries some other guy, and then this guy dies? Maybe she shouldn't marry her brother-in-law, her new brother-in-law, because, hey, that would be compelling this guy to invite promiscuousness, right? In other words, Rabbi is asking, does she retain this label forever, that she's always this girl who, no matter what, no matter who she ends up marrying or who dies in her life, she can never marry the brother-in-law because she's a girl who's inviting promiscuity wherever she goes.
Maybe the second marriage was a happy marriage and it lasted for years.
And that's the Gemara's answer, like both of you are saying. Rabbi Yosef responds and says, it's quite possible that in the second marriage it wasn't so toxic, right? And this gets back to what we said in the beginning of the Gemara, that whenever there's an issue with the Sotah, he's equally as fault as she is. So we can't just say he's a great guy. We label her that, she's the promiscuous one. He got rid of her, so he's a tzaddik, and therefore whoever she marries is making this terrible mistake by inviting promiscuousness. It takes 2 to tango. And it's quite possible that in the first marriage it was toxic, and therefore we don't want the brother to be compelled to marry someone who had a toxic relationship with his own brother. But then when she remarries and that guy dies, maybe the second marriage was a happy marriage, was a healthy marriage, where she behaved properly and they had a loving relationship. And why shouldn't she marry the brother-in-law? Why do we have to label her forever? And so no matter where she goes, she's considered a promiscuous woman, and no matter who touches her, is doing a mistake. This is the Gemara's answer to that, as you both are correctly pointing out. Okay, so this is 3 different ways of understanding the conversation between Rabbi Yosef and Abaye, all of which lead to the same conclusion. And each of the versions bring out another detail. And the conclusion, namely, is that after a woman becomes a Sotah, if her husband dies, she does not marry the brother-in-law. If they don't have any children, she doesn't marry the brother-in-law. Either we deduce that from the verse, because the verse says she has to find a foreign person, or because we don't want to compel, 2 different versions of understanding, how we don't want to compel the brother-in-law to marry someone who was in a toxic relationship with her own brother, with his own brother. But then if she went off and married somebody else, which she may, and that person's making a choice and risking it, so to speak, by marrying a woman with history, and therefore it's his choice to marry her, we're not going to say yes, we're not going to say no. And if he does marry her, and it's very likely that this new relationship will do well, she'll be in a happy relationship, she won't feel the need to be promiscuous or whatnot. And then, if he dies, she can happily marry the brother-in-law, as the law of the Yavam goes, because it's quite possible the second marriage was healthy and well. Okay, that's where we are at this moment. Now the Gemara is going to introduce another way of coming to the conclusion that she should not marry the brother-in-law. She should not go through with Yibum after becoming a Sotah and her husband dies. Now here it's I've been asked to point out when the Gemara does principles. So one of the 13 principles that we read about in the morning before we pray from the Braita of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says the Torah is extrapolated by 13 principles. And now the Gemara is going to use one of the probably most commonly used principle, and that is the principle of kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer literally translates as lenient and strict. Or another way of saying it is how much to the more so. I think there's a Latin term for it, but I don't know what it is. It's like a Latin legal term. But essentially, it's reasonable deduction that bases the premise on if something more strict has a leniency, then certainly the lenient scenario will incorporate that leniency. That's essentially the logic. If that which is regarded as a more strict law, yet maintains some element of leniency, then something which is generally regarded as a more lenient law certainly will retain that leniency. That's the general rule. And the same thing in the reverse. If something lenient maintains a certain strictness, then certainly that which is more strict will maintain that strictness. So this is kal v'chomer. It's or chomer v'kal, kal v'chomer, lenient and strict, or how much to the more so. So the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Amar Rabbi says, kal v'chomer, we're going to do this kal v'chomer. Namely, im nesra b'mutala, when she goes to the law of the Sotah, before she drinks the water, after she secludes herself after warning, she then becomes forbidden, nesra, she's forbidden, b'mutala, to that which was permitted to her. Meaning to say, her husband. This is her legal husband. So in some sense, she has permissibility to be intimate with this guy because this is her husband. And yet Torah says she's forbidden to be with him. Then ba'asala, to that which to begin with was forbidden to her, namely the brother-in-law, because until her husband dies, a brother-in-law is forbidden to her on a very strict level. It's part of the group of forbidden relations, is one cannot be intimate with their husband's wife. So until the moment of his death, this was a strict forbidden relationship. Right? So in other words, like this, there are two relationships we're talking about. Her relationship with her husband and her relationship with her brother. Of the two, the relationship with her husband is the lenient relationship, because ordinarily she's allowed to be with him. And the relationship with her brother-in-law is the strict relationship, because ordinarily she may not be with him. Now, if the Sotah comes along and makes the more lenient relationship forbidden, i.e. the relationship with her husband is now cut off, she cannot be intimate with him, even though she's still legitimately married to him. So in the lenient relationship, she cannot be with him. How much more so in the strict relationship, the relationship with her brother-in-law, she certainly can't be intimate with him. That's the Gemara's, that's the Rabbi's kal v'chomer. In neser b'mutala, if she's forbidden to the one who is permitted to her, she's forbidden to her own husband. Ba'asala, to her brother-in-law, who to begin with is forbidden, like kol shekain, is it not all the more so she should not be related? She should not be allowed to be with him. So this is the Gemara's kal v'chomer to come to the conclusion why she cannot be with her husband, because she was forbidden from being. Why she cannot go with her brother-in-law, because she was forbidden from being together with the more lenient relationship, which is her actual husband. She was barred from being with him. How much more so she's barred from being with the more strict relationship, her brother-in-law. So we're going to stop over here, and the Gemara is going to question the premise of this. The judge tells us that the Latin word is mutandis mutandi. I'm for sure botching the pronunciation, but you can look at the chat box. You can see
mutandis mutandi.
Okay,
Right.
So that's it. So we're going to stop over here, but the Gemara is going to take the same principle of the Gemara is going to take the same principle of the kal v'chomer and apply it to other cases and see if it holds up. Because in order for a logical kal v'chomer to hold up, it has to be able to work universally, right? And if you take the same kal v'chomer and you apply it to somewhere else, and the law doesn't work out, then something's faulty with your logic. And that's what the Gemara is going to do tomorrow, God willing. Take the same premise of two relationships, one that is stricter, one that is lenient, and see where there's permissibility in the stricter one, and yet strictness in the lenient one, and see if the same logic can be deduced in those other cases. That, God willing, comes
Levi,
tomorrow. Yes, go ahead.
Doesn't the woman have any rights? I mean, what if the first husband that she had, let's go back to the first husband, right? What if he had 3-4 wives?
Yeah.
And she was being neglected, and she was being, he was very harsh with her. He was slapping her around. He was neglecting her. He wasn't talking to her. He was favoring all the other women. Didn't she have a right
By Jewish law,
to do something?
Yeah, so
to do something?
That's a very good question. So first, by Jewish law, she can compel a divorce if he's not living up to the halakhic standard. That's what the ketubah is really. In some ways, the truth goes back to even before the ketubah, but that's what the ketubah really is. The ketubah is a contract that protects her. That if he is not treating her the way he's supposed to, then she can take the ketubah, compel him to divorce, and take money from him.
Uh-huh.
So
And that goes to the
her
Beis
legal
Din.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ketubah is a
Okay,
real legal
so that's-
document. Like even till today, you sign that document. Actually, you don't sign it, but witnesses watch you agree to it, and they sign it.
That's right.
You're legally bound by that thing. And it's quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
It's like the earliest version of a prenup. It's probably the earliest document that protects women's rights in history. I
So
can't
we're-
think of a document that goes farther back, a legal document to protect women's rights. I don't know. Maybe there is.
So we're just taking the scenario that the woman is married to him, but she's fooling around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. That's the scenario in its extreme version. But the Gemara
That's right.
acknowledges that it isn't necessarily the case, right? Because the Gemara also acknowledged that she can marry. First of all, the Gemara mentioned earlier that it takes two to tango. But even today, we
That's
learned that it's possible she marries another guy and it's a happy marriage,
Right.
right?
That's right.
But in the extreme sense of the law, it's where he is perfect and she is messing around. But in reality, it's rarely ever the case,
Right.
right?
Super.
Good point. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
Levi, I have a
Thank
friend.
Yeah.
I have a friend up here who's. We've been taking the Gemara class with Kudan
Yes.
for 3 years now.
Mhm.
If he listens in on one of your classes, is it okay?
My pleasure. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Because he's knowledgeable and everything else. He's
My
a
pleasure.
psychologist. Okay, I'll ask him.
My pleasure.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Thank you.
A wonderful day.
Rav Levi, thank you so much. God bless
Wonderful
you.
day.
Yes, you call.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful day.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
such
you.
You too, Michael.
a celebration to
day.
be able to listen and to be with all of you. Thank you. God bless
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You,
everybody.
Judge.
you too.
Good
God
day.
bless. Take
All
care.
Take a
Have
class.
a-
To take a class with Levi is like having a good dessert.
Oh.
Thank you.
Very
Very
Thanks.
kind of you to say.
Thank you. God bless.
Have a good day, everybody.
Day.
Thank you.